And good. So, like I said, the French Revolution, Part 3, Thermidorian reaction. I might have to stop this for just a second. Let me see. No, I got it. The Thermidorian reaction is in the month of Thermidor. You might remember that they changed the revolutionary calendar, or the calendars, to make it a revolutionary calendar. And Thermidor is basically late July, early August. And once again, the revolution really had turned too radical. There was just too much terror. Too many people were being killed beyond just people who needed to be killed, so to speak. Robespierre, his allies in this class of people, the sans-culottes, had become too powerful, so the terror was stopped. It's stopped by the convention. It's stopped by the parliament. As they shout down Robespierre, they have him arrested, they have him executed the next day, and then they decide to change things. They created a new government which has the really kind of bland and unimaginative name, the Directory. Kind of sounds like a phone book to me. It lasts about 4 years, and what they decided was that they're going to put the ability to vote, or they're going to put suffrage back into the hands of responsible people, take it away from the lower classes. And so only letting people of property vote for these councils that existed, these kinds of new named parliaments. And then they also let soldiers vote as well. Do you think that's wise? Do you think that's the right thing? Do you have an opinion on that? Totally agree with you. And then also, the military power, having put those people into power, probably going to support them if the people or people who don't have the ability to vote rise up. So, we don't want to get too specific about what kind of parliament it was, or what kinds of legislatures they had. Just know that there were a couple different councils, and then there was a directory of 5 men in charge as the executive, instead of one king or a prime minister or whatever. Well, at one point in time, this directory, as I say, wasn't really inspiring to the people. It wasn't completely popular. It's really sort of kept in power by the military. There was a period of time when a bunch of royalists tried to seize power. They're going to storm one of these councils and change things dramatically. And the directory, these 5 men, called in a young officer and a young artillery officer, a guy who had a bunch of cannon, to protect them. And he did so by what he called firing a whiff of grape shot. Grape shot is grape-sized balls that you shove into a cannon. You put several hundred in there, and then you fire the cannon, and it acts as a gigantic shotgun. So this whiff of grape shot that Napoleon was firing at this crowd of royalists was essentially kind of a murderous discharge of grape-sized balls of metal, and that sure enough got them off the street, and it protected the directory at that point in time. Later on, there was an election, and the folks in the directory didn't like who had been elected, and so they asked Napoleon to come in and protect them with troops and basically nullify that election. This is the Fructidor coup that happened. So a couple of times this Napoleon guy protects the directory from its own, let's say, unpopularity and uninspiring regime. Here's Napoleon hanging out in Egypt in front of the Sphinx. Napoleon traveled quite widely when he was conquering much of Europe. Here's Napoleon, artist's rendition of Napoleon going through the Alps on horseback. You can see Bonaparte is down there on that stone, and then there's also Hannibal, a Carthaginian general who also went through the Alps on his trek towards Rome. And there's Bonaparte hanging out in his study, itching his belly. Well, Napoleon was keeping the directory in power while being a successful general. They allowed him. They basically gave him a promotion from just artillery captain or colonel or whatever it was to general. He goes off and he's fighting the Austrians in Italy, and he's winning big. And he even goes over, as you saw, to Egypt and is fighting Egyptian troops and British troops there. He didn't do so well in that particular campaign. Kind of had to sneak home and left his troops there. But what he decided to do was seize power for himself. And he does this with a couple of other guys. One of them made a mark at the beginning of the revolution, Abbé Sieyès, who wrote the pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? Well, Abbé Sieyès, this guy who once thought that the nobility were useless and the third estate should rule, has now decided that what France needs is a strong man, and he chooses Napoleon to be kind of that strong man. Napoleon has other ideas. He's not going to just be the face of a strong man. He's actually going to be a strong man. And so this consulate is Napoleon sending his troops to take over the Directory, send the people from the Directory home, and take over as first consul, a kind of hearkening back to Roman times, and ruling France for a period of time as first consul. Basically, he's got a popular dictatorship. In 1802, he asked Frenchmen if they wanted him to be, their consul, basically for life. Do you want me to be your ruler for life? And plebiscites are yes/no questions, and they're always kind of sketchy, actually. And this plebiscite was 88%, 90% of the men who voted said, "Oh yes, Napoleon, we want you to be our dictator, our first consul for life." He is really quite popular. He's got great successes with leading the army. Other than that little campaign that he had in Egypt, he's just been completely successful. He has a very efficient bureaucracy, and he's a winner, and people love that. People love winners. The bureaucracy collects the taxes that they need to support the army, and he actually does create a legislature, a parliament, but it's a sham parliament. It's not allowed to do anything at all. It doesn't debate. It just, people are elected to it, and then they're known for being in the parliament that basically never meets and doesn't do anything. Napoleon has 100% of the power. It's kind of ironic how sometimes there are these wars that are fought, or these revolutions that are had in order to share power, and then what you get out of it is a one person in charge, kind of like the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell being in charge for a bit. The church remains a problem, though. You might remember with the civil constitution of the clergy, people who were loyal Catholics or devout Catholics didn't feel like they could support the revolution, didn't feel like they could support France, so Napoleon has to deal with that. Any questions up to this point in time? Yeah, sure. Yes, he's popular with all of the French people except for the ones he's persecuting and throwing in prison. And that's just a pretty small number because, like I said, had Louis the XVI even been a winner, if he had, been more popular, been a winner, winning wars, seeming to do things for the people, seeming to have an efficient, non-corrupt government, dealing with the debt problem and so on, I think people would have loved him. People like winners and they don't like losers, and so it's much less likely that you'll be overthrown if you are winning wars and having a successful economy. So what Napoleon does is make a deal with the Pope. And this is called a concordat. Usually a deal with the Pope, and we'll see two or three of these in European history, is called a concordat. Concordat with the papacy in 1801 is Napoleon basically winning this contest with the church. Napoleon tells the Pope that no church property is going to be returned. It would really, quite frankly, would be impossible. They stripped the church property from the church and sold it, if you remember, to pay off the debt. How in the world could they get that property back? Take it from peasants and middle class people who had bought that land? I just, it just isn't going to happen. The clergy still continued to be state employees. They still got paid by the state. And even Catholicism, and this could have been a bone that Napoleon threw to the Pope, having Catholicism as the national church of France, like it pretty much had always been. All Napoleon does is say, he says, listen, Your Eminence, here's what I'll give you in this Concordat: the statement that uh, the majority of people in France are Catholic. That's just nothing. That's just a statement of fact. So it doesn't really get the Pope anything. But here's what it does for Napoleon, and here's what it does for devout Catholics. Napoleon can now be supported by those devout Catholics. Those devout Catholics can be supportive of Napoleon and France. This is a huge game changer. It gets rid of a lot of the counter-revolution or counter-revolutionary spirit that existed. Isn't that a weird image over there of the Concordat with the papacy? That's Napoleon, the guy who's apparently his toga is falling off, and somebody is lighting his hair on fire. Well, we will go beyond that if you have nothing to say about that. Napoleon also creates his own kind of Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen mixed in with the Constitution. Really, what this is called is the Napoleonic Code, or the Code Napoleon. And it is a series of laws. It's a bunch of laws and law books. But as you see, as we go through it, these are fundamental statements of rights and maybe some obligations. But things like all citizens equal before the law, the abolition of serfdom and feudalism. Let's be honest, serfdom hasn't really been in France since the late Middle Ages, and so that's kind of a weird thing to say. Feudalism too, that was just about paying feudal dues. Choice of profession is guaranteed. You're not going to be locked out of any kind of profession because there's a guild, or because you had to be related to somebody who did that profession, or because it's a government job that you had to buy into or something. Nothing like that. It's a kind of economic freedom, really, kind of Adam Smith sort of deal. Religious toleration, property rights protected, unions and strikes were illegal, and then women's rights were also curtailed. Women really didn't gain very much from the French Revolution, and then Napoleon comes along and makes sure that the man in every household is kind of like Napoleon, is the absolute ruler within that household. There was even a woman who created a Declaration of Rights for let's see, it's for men it's the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. She took the entire thing and wrote in women, and it's the Declaration of Rights of Woman and Citizen. And it wasn't very popular. She actually lost her head. She got her head chopped off. So, with Napoleon's administration, as I said, the bureaucracy was really quite efficient. He had his Napoleonic Code, his law, and then he also took over those départements, those 83, eventually extending to 119 different territories within France. Each one of those little governmental territories or départements had a prefect, and that prefect was a kind of governor who answered directly to Napoleon. So he has really good control over all of France. His tax collection is really quite efficient, and it falls equally upon all Frenchmen according to their wealth. He's got a very robust censorship that that he personally sometimes engages in. He will look at, what a newspaper wants to write or what an editor wants to have in his newspaper, and Napoleon will literally himself scratch out things and send the copy back to the editor. He also has a kind of secret police force. We're moving towards a sort of more modern dictatorship, and in modern dictatorships you do have censorship and you have the secret police as well. So the very few people who are opposed to Napoleon are fairly quickly rounded up and thrown into prison or exiled. It's very efficient, and like I said, very popular, so he doesn't really have to do too much to stay in power. You see how I'm pausing so you can interject? Well, let's move on to the Napoleonic Wars, and we won't get too tied up in all of the different wars of coalition. There are about five of them, and I'm going to simplify things for us. The war, yeah, go ahead. He wants himself, and he doesn't want a. I'm going to say that he doesn't want a republic. If we understand a republic as being multiple people in charge, and then also having some number of people decide who those rulers are. Napoleon, as you'll see, is really just all about Napoleon being in charge. Sometimes having the trappings of a legislature or things like that, but in the end, it's just Napoleon wants to be an absolute monarch. Or, and this is a great question, maybe what Napoleon really is like Catherine the Great and like Frederick the Great and like Joseph the Second. Maybe he's an enlightened despot. Maybe more about that later. Thank you for the question. Keep asking them. There, another one. I think that's maybe just a bit of an insult that other nations placed upon him. I think he's about 5'4", if I'm not mistaken, which isn't completely short for that period of time. But they certainly envied his success and took every turn that they could to kind of bring him down a notch or two. It was really hard though because he's very very successful, especially in all of these wars. Like I say, he has got these wars of coalition, and he's able to defeat what are AP and R? Yes, multiple times, especially Austria. He just seems to beat up on Austria every single war he fights. Probably Austria loses to Napoleon like five times, Prussia a couple times, and Russia a couple times. But Britain is unconquerable, and Britain is only unconquerable because of the English Channel, because they have this credible fleet and a body of water between the continent and Britain. It's kind of like trying to have a tiger fight versus a shark, if that makes sense. Which powers the tiger? Yeah, and the shark. And the only place that they really can fight is is kind of on the beach there with the waves coming in, but it doesn't really work. There is, for example, early in the 1800s, like 1804, I believe, the Battle of Trafalgar, in which the English fleet or the British fleet sinks a French fleet. And after that, the British basically have rule of the seas for, gosh, 100 years or more. They have the largest fleet and are really the world power as far as the Navy's concerned. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. You're getting ahead of me, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And that starts the beginning of the end. So, uh, look at before Napoleon starts to lose. Look at what he's able to conquer. This is Europe in 1812. This is before the Russian campaign. The British are in control of a few places, mostly places that they can protect by their fleet. Napoleon has this empire, and it's France on steroids. He's been able to take over the Netherlands. Remember how Louis XIV desperately desired to take over the Netherlands? Well, Napoleon takes it over and turns it over to one of his relatives and calls it the Batavian Republic. He's able to conquer Prussia. He's able to conquer all of the German states and turn them into the so-called Confederation of the Rhine. They are now his allies. He resurrects. He did. He kills the Holy Roman Empire once and for all. We can either be sad or happy about that. He resurrects Poland as the Grand Duchy of Warsaw for a period of time. He creates a united kingdom of Italy for the first time and makes himself the head of that. He even creates a Swiss republic with himself as president, and all of these places are getting the Napoleonic Code. So while the Napoleonic Code, maybe I didn't stress this, but the Napoleonic Code was essentially stuff left over from the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, right? it was hardly anything new. But if you go to, if you take parts of Italy or parts of Spain or parts of what used to be the Holy Roman Empire and give them religious toleration or give them, guaranteed access to any profession, it's really pretty revolutionary. And the Enlightenment is being brought to these states by force of arms by Napoleon. Not democracy or not republicanism, but certainly some things have been changed that are more enlightened, if that makes sense to you. Napoleon, though, that was a good question from earlier about, what does he want? Napoleon starts to get a kind of Napoleonic complex where he wants to be not just somebody from the lower aristocracy. Actually, we haven't discussed this, but Napoleon isn't even French. He's from Corsica, so he's sort of like half Italian in a weird way. But but he's able to, through his own merits, rise to be the leader of France. And he wants to kind of get beyond that. He wants to elevate himself beyond just being like first consul. And so he decides in 1804 that since he's conquered all of these other territories, he's greater than a king. He is, in fact, an emperor, like the Roman emperors or like Charlemagne. And so he declares himself emperor in 1804. And it gets a little bit weirder than that. He also divorces his first wife, Josephine, this woman that had kind of stuck by him for a long period of time. She was too old to have an heir. We've heard this story before, right? She's too old to have a child with Napoleon, and so he decided to divorce her, and he kind of shopped around for the most noble aristocratic person he could find to marry, and he ends up marrying Marie Louise Habsburg. Like I said, the Austrians had been defeated multiple times by Napoleon, and so what's particularly weird about this is he then becomes related to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI by marriage. I know both of those people are dead, but don't you think it's kind of weird that that this guy sort of is resurrecting the old regime? Here he is married to a young Habsburg princess, just like Louis XVI was married to a Habsburg princess. He also resurrects some noble titles and gives those out to people that he likes, but he doesn't bring back noble privilege. He doesn't make tax exemptions a thing for nobles or anything like that. But people still like to be dukes, and they still like to be barons, and they still like to be counts and so on. And so he is surrounding himself with those kinds of people. And then he takes all of his brothers and brothers-in-law. He's got a fairly large family, and like I said, they're just kind of a half Italian family from the island of Corsica, and he puts them in control of all these client states. So he makes one brother king of Spain. He puts another brother in charge of the Batavian Republic. He gives a kingdom to one of his brothers in the grand in what becomes the Confederation of the Rhine. So, it's kind of like a Bonaparte mafia taking over and taking over all of Europe and running Europe. Here's a wonderful image. You can't really see maybe what's going on, but the Pope is standing there watching as Napoleon crowns Josephine as empress, and all the bigwigs of Europe are assembled there. This is his coronation as emperor in 1804. Well, Napoleon is frustrated that although he is really successful on land up until 1812, as we'll find out, but he's very successful being the tiger and defeating all of these other states and taking them over. He's really quite frustrated that he can't get at the shark, that he can't defeat Britain. And so he creates something called the Continental System, which is either also referred to as the Milan Decrees or the Berlin Decrees. He decrees that no continental country, nobody in Europe, is allowed to trade with Britain. I think you can imagine why people in Europe would be upset at that. What are they getting from Britain? Manufactured goods, yeah, things that were being manufactured in their. Remember, they're the first country to industrialize in their cottage industry, or quite frankly, they started to have factories by now. And so those cheap goods, people want those cheap goods, and that's the brilliance of Napoleon's idea too. He thinks that if these factories are producing a crazy amount and have nowhere to sell them, they'll sort of choke on their own production, and then the business in Britain will fall apart. They'll have unemployment, they'll have depression, and so on. And that's what he's trying to do. Portugal, for some strange reason, is usually friendly with Britain. They refused to go along with this blockade. They got invaded. Other countries were just angered by it and tried to get around it. And the British spent a lot of time smuggling, smuggling manufactured goods into Europe. They found new markets. For example, they started to trade with South America and Central America a lot more, because Central America and South America were no longer listening to the King of Spain, because the King of Spain was no longer Ferdinand VII. It was now one of Napoleon's relatives. Here's where Russia refuses as well. Russia is trading with the British. They refuse to go along with this continental system, and Napoleon says, I'll take you down too," and decides to invade Russia in 1812. Yes, absolutely. Very little. He's really quite busy with running France and with conquering Europe, and trying to kind of keep control over that. So France, as you can imagine, French people start to become increasingly unpopular as they are taking over all of these places. They start to, or they, well, this is brilliant, you do this too. They make the people they conquer pay taxes to France, or to the French. Now, people don't like to pay taxes to their own country. You can imagine how humiliating it is to pay taxes um, to a foreign nation that's occupying you. The French also start to conscript some of the people that they had taken over as well. They start to put them in uniform and have them fight on the side of France. Now, you and I both know that this is probably not a great idea, and it gets to be a terrible idea the farther we march into history, or farther we get close to the modern period. You can't imagine, putting an American in, I don't know, a French uniform and expecting them to fight well for the country of France. But it's okay way back then. They're annoyed. The Europeans are annoyed by the continental system, even though Napoleon's idea is to bring this nation of shopkeepers to their knees. It's not working, and it's just annoying people that the French had taken over. And nationalism starts to develop from hatred of the French. I think nationalism, love of your own country, oftentimes comes from hating other countries. And so if they've been conquered several times and are being taxed or being conscripted and so on, you can imagine that some people, some German people, for example, start to say, we're Germans and we have nothing in common with these French people. We hate them. We want to we want to throw off the shackles of the French and have our own successful Germany. Nationalism, though, also is created, I think, through the envy of France. They look at France conquering all these places, their country's running really well, they have crazy patriotism, and other countries envy that. They say, gosh, I wish we could do that too. This is, for example, why the Prussians give up serfdom in 1812. They say, well, we can't have a nation of patriots in Prussia if 80%, 90% of the people are just sort of like sheep that we exploit in the countryside. Somebody mentioned earlier that the Holy Roman Empire was killed by Napoleon. He does this around 1806, and he reorganizes the Holy Roman Empire into the Confederation of the Rhine. The leader of this confederation is his brother Jerome, and there are far fewer German states. Napoleon grants large territories to 16 different German rulers. and then expects those 16 different states and those 16 different rulers to be on his side. And that works out really pretty well. There are a lot of Germans who fight along with the French army against others up until they invade Russia or during the Russian campaign. This Confederation of the Rhine will fall apart, though, in 1813 as Napoleon starts to be defeated in Russia. They no longer fear him, and so they are no longer his ally. And one by one, these German states sneak away from an alliance with Napoleon, and join the other side, join the British and the Russians and the Prussians and the Austrians against Napoleon. Here's a map of the Confederation of the Rhine. It's kind of like West Germany, more or less. It's even more than that, I think. It's about, I don't want to give a guess, but it's most of the German states. As was mentioned previously, Napoleon finally does lose. He loses in a couple places, actually. One that isn't quite so well known as his campaign in Russia is the Peninsular War against Spain. This starts in 1807. In order for Napoleon to get at Portugal, to invade Portugal for not going along with the continental system, they have to go through Spain. And when they invade Spain, the French are able to pretty easily defeat the Spanish army, but then the Spanish army takes off their uniforms and continues to fight against French soldiers, French occupiers, in what they call guerrilla conflict. Guerrilla is a Spanish word meaning little war, and that's exactly what it is. It's trying to kill French soldiers, by burning down the barn that they're sleeping in, or taking pot shots at them from behind walls and so on. The French get really upset about that, and they commit atrocities. They say, for every French soldier killed, we'll line up and shoot 20 Spaniards, and they do that. You can see that happening in that painting. But this ties down thousands and thousands of troops, and for the Spanish, the French are just godless invaders, and their nationalism is off the charts, and they're trying to throw off the shackles of the French. Yeah. Yeah, this is the beginning of the story of Latin American independence. They get used to not listening to a king, as their king is imprisoned by Napoleon, and Napoleon's brother takes over in Spain. And then when that king comes back, as we'll see, and says, okay, let's go back to the way things were before, they said, well, we got a taste of independence, and we kind of want to keep that going. The last thing that happens is the invasion of Russia, which happens in 1812. I think I have a whole slide devoted to that. Yeah. Napoleon puts together the largest army that Europe had seen, perhaps ever, maybe about 700,000 troops, many of them not French, as I said, Germans and other nationalities. The Russians, my advice to you, by the way, if you ever had the chance to invade Russia, just don't. It probably won't go well. And so it doesn't go well for Napoleon. The Russians do something called the scorched earth policy. In other words, as invaders come into Russia, the Russians pull back and destroy anything that the invaders might want to use, like fields of wheat for their cattle, or structures that people could sleep in, and wells. The wells are poisoned with dead animals and things like that. And so it makes it very difficult for these French troops to march into deeper and deeper and deeper into Russia, but they keep doing it. Winter comes, and here's the kicker for would-be invaders of Russia. Russian winters are kind of like Minnesota winters. They're extremely cold, and Europeans aren't used to them, and it decimates the troops. They just can't deal with the crazy cold, but Russian people can. The French troops finally get to, or Napoleon's troops finally get to Moscow, and it's basically December 1812, and the Russians burn Moscow. They burn, they burn this major city in order to keep it out of the hands of Napoleon and his troops. And Napoleon and his troops realize that they are stuck in the middle of Russia without without enough food, without enough shelter, without enough clothing, and so on. And they try as quickly as they can to get the heck out of Russia. Only about 100 to 1,000 of them actually make it back to the border. So 600,000 troops are just frozen to death, killed, taken prisoner, what have you. And this encourages Austria and Prussia to jump in the fight with Russia and Britain against Napoleon. And from there, it's just really pretty quick rolling the French forces back to France, with all four of the great powers and some minor powers joined together to defeat Napoleon. Napoleon is defeated in 1813 into 1814. And in 1814, he basically loses, and he abdicates, or he has to give up power. Now, these allies, once again, it's Britain and Russia and Austria and Prussia for the most part, decide to put a legitimate ruler on the throne. And the legitimate ruler is the brother of Louis XVI. He calls himself Louis XVIII. I'll pause for the question. Louis XVII was Louis XVI's son, who was imprisoned with his parents and then was an orphan thanks to the guillotine, and he is kind of neglected to death and dies as a child. When Louis's brother comes to the throne, he wants to say that all of that stuff that happened, all of the Republic and the Directory and Napoleon, all of that was, illegal. It was all not real. And so he puts this child on the throne, posthumously, and then puts himself on the throne. Well, Napoleon, they weren't really sure what to do with Napoleon, these allies, these winners. And this sounds like a crazy story that somebody really should do a movie about, but they decided to give Napoleon an island in the Mediterranean and about 1,000 men to rule over. They were just being really nice to him. And then there was they put a British governor in charge, sort of to make sure that Napoleon minded his P's and Q's and it was not causing any trouble. That's kind of a crazy thing to do with a defeated ruler, but I think they just had a lot of respect for him because he was able to keep things going the way he had. Well, Napoleon gets bored. The British governor goes to the Italian mainland for some sort of business, and Napoleon decides to take his 1,000 men, cross the Mediterranean, and basically invade Europe and march on Paris. I'll let that sink in for a second. On his way to Paris, Louis XVIII sends troops to go intercept him and arrest him and maybe kill him. Those troops show up. Napoleon says, "It's me, Napoleon, your emperor." And they're like, "You had us at 'it's me, Napoleon.'" They switch sides. They march with Napoleon to Paris. Louis XVIII has to flee. And Napoleon is defeated then, putting together a big army, but then marches into what will become Belgium, and he's defeated at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The Allies put Louis XVIII back on the throne again, and Napoleon is sent to a nasty island in the Atlantic where he has no chance of escaping, and he doesn't get to play ruler anymore. Whew. He has guards. Yeah, I'll show you. So this is the first island where he's getting off. It doesn't even look like he's been defeated, right? He's disembarking at this place called Elba. He's got a band playing for him, all these men in uniform, and then does the 100 Days. Here's Louis XVIII at his desk. He's a more modern king, I think. And here's poor Napoleon, exiled to this Atlantic island, St. Helena, and watched very carefully by British people, basically. And he writes his memoirs. That's what he's doing right there. It looks like he's trying to remember, and he's gotten kind of out of shape, and it's kind of a sad end to Napoleon. Well, Napoleon's legacy is this, I think. There is a real fear of the French Revolution or another revolution over the next 30, 18, 15, 25, 35, 45, over the next 33 years. This next 33 years, 1815 to 1848, is called the Age of Metternich. And in this Age of Metternich, the European powers are consumed with the idea of legitimacy. Napoleon was an example of merit, of a meritocracy. He had his position because he was great at it. They don't want that. They want people to have positions because they are the legitimate ruler, sometimes very ineffective, but nonetheless. Napoleon and the French Revolution is a revolutionary example for all of Europe. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen sticks with people. The idea of equality before the law and religious toleration and things like that. Also, the idea that you have a revolution for you and your country, and you fight like heck for it. You become a patriot for your country. That's that's something that really resonates with other nations. They saw how successful the French were when they did it. Liberalism, liberty meaning freedom, increased freedom, is something that is desired by some and hated and feared by others. This is kind of like the difference between a liberal and a conservative in the 19th century, if you want to think about it that way. And then nationalism becomes really a force to be reckoned with. The nation means unity, it means strength, it means the ability to defeat others. And the French showed everybody else how to do that, and everybody else wanted to have that same kind of thing. And they start to gain that. And what you'll see happening within a few decades is other nations that hadn't been nations before coming together, like the Germans and like the Italians. I am done.